When the nurse asked if I was Claire Evans, my first instinct was to lie. After all, my father had ignored me my entire life. Why should I be the one to show up now that he was hooked to machines and alone? I'm Claire, the daughter he never hugged, the girl who got silence on her birthdays while my sister got the world. But when he collapsed, I was the only one who came. This story isn't just about betrayal. It's about what happens when the forgotten child becomes the strongest one. Have you ever had to care for someone who never cared for you? Tell me in the comments, because some wounds run deeper when they come from family. They say, when a baby is born, the world celebrates. Mine was quiet. No balloons, no hand-knit booties waiting in a bassinet, just the sound of a heart monitor going flat and a man learning he'd never see his wife again. My dad never said it outright, but I was the reason he never healed. I came into this world as my mother left it. I didn't cry when I was born. At least, that's what the nurse told Grandpa George. She said I just opened my eyes and stared like I already knew what I'd done. Growing up in the Evans house felt like living in a museum of someone else's life. There was a photograph of my parents, Margaret and Richard, perched on the mantel above the cold fireplace. My mother wore an ivory dress with lace sleeves. My dad looked younger, happier. I used to trace her smile with my eyes, wondering if it would have curved the same way when she looked at me. I don't remember her voice, just the silence she left behind. The house was full of old wood, floors that creaked like they were trying to speak, doors that stuck during the Charleston humidity. But the loudest thing inside was my father's silence. He didn't shout, he didn't hit, he just didn't see me, not really. And somehow, that hurt more. Melissa, my older sister, had a presence that filled a room. People said she got Mom's hair and Dad's confidence. She was always surrounded by warmth, by praise, by expectation. Just like her mother, the neighbors would say at church, placing soft hands on her shoulder. Meanwhile, I stood nearby, clutching the edge of my dress, waiting for someone to notice I was part of the same family. Dad used to take Melissa to the farmer's market every Saturday. They'd come home with paper bags full of peaches and honey sticks. Once, I asked if I could come along next time. He didn't look up from the sports section and muttered, "It's our thing." That was the end of it. At 10, I was already doing the dishes after dinner, folding towels just right, packing Melissa's lunch when she asked. Dad once told me, "She needs to focus on her future. You should learn how to take care of things." I knew what he meant. Melissa would go places. I'd stay behind and sweep. I still remember the first time I heard the words that shaped my story. It was late one night. The floorboards in our house made it easy to eavesdrop, though I didn't mean to. I'd gotten up for water and paused outside the living room when I heard Dad talking to Grandpa George. "I told Margaret not to go through with it," Dad said. His voice was hoarse, like he'd been holding it in for years. She was high risk. I begged her to end it, but she wouldn't. I stood frozen in the hallway, bare feet on the cool floor. I wasn't ready to lose her, he added, and then she died for, what? A baby I didn't even want. The glass I was holding slipped from my hand and shattered quietly. But I didn't cry. I just stared down at the pieces and felt something inside me break too. The next morning, Dad didn't ask about the glass. He never mentioned the conversation, but I knew he'd seen the broken shards I left on the counter, and I knew what he saw when he looked at me, a ghost in place of a daughter. From that day on, I stopped asking for bedtime stories. I stopped calling out when I got an A on a spelling test. I stopped asking why he didn't come to my piano recital or why he brought flowers to Mom's grave on her birthday, but never said mine aloud. I just started making myself smaller, quiet, useful. At school, I would watch other girls run to their fathers at pickup time, arms flung wide, ponytails bouncing. I'd stand by the fence wondering if mine would remember I stayed late for art club. He usually did, but he rarely got out of the car. There's a kind of loneliness that settles in your bones when you're constantly trying to prove you deserve space, when even your birthday feels like an apology. I clung to the wedding photo on the mantel. It became my mirror. I'd stare into my mother's eyes, trying to see pieces of myself in her, trying to believe that maybe, just maybe, she would have loved me. But no matter how many times I looked, the photo stayed the same. A frozen moment before everything fell apart. So I stopped asking why he didn't love me. I just tried to stay out of his way. Melissa always knew how to walk into a room and make it hers. That Thanksgiving, she didn't just come home from college. She floated in, like someone arriving for a magazine shoot. Glossy curls, red lipstick, boots that clicked with confidence. You'd never guess we shared the same childhood. If Dad blamed me for Mom's death, I remember thinking as she kissed him on the cheek, then Melissa was his second chance. The Evans house smelled like roasted turkey, cinnamon candles, and stress. The table was dressed in its best. Lace runner, silverware polished like it mattered, wine glasses filled just shy of generous. Grandpa George was carving the turkey in the kitchen, humming an old Willie Nelson tune. Melissa and Dad were already seated, swirling wine and laughing as if they hadn't been apart a day. When I stepped into the dining room wearing a burgundy dress I'd picked out on sale, Melissa tilted her head and smiled like a game show host. "Oh, Claire," she said, eyes dancing, "that's such a sweet color on you. Real pilgrim chic." Dad chuckled into his glass. "It's Thanksgiving," I said, forcing a laugh. "I figured traditional works." "Sure," she replied, reaching for the mashed potatoes. "I mean, some of us take risks. But safe is fine, too." Derek sat beside me, oblivious. He was new to our family table. Clean-cut, polite, the type to help old ladies at crosswalks and say ma'am, even to girls his age. We'd been dating 6 months, and this was his first time meeting my family. At first, things were fine. Derek complimented the stuffing. George poured him sweet tea and asked about his major. Melissa asked questions, too, just not the kind you'd expect from a sister. "So, Derek," she said, tucking hair behind her ear, "how does someone like you end up with someone like Claire?" He looked confused, but laughed awkwardly. "What do you mean?" She waved it off. "Just teasing. You're very handsome, you know. I bet all your professors adore you." Then came the shoulder touches, the lingering eye contact, the inside jokes that weren't hers to make. I felt like a background character at my own dinner. After dessert, apple pie with too much nutmeg, Melissa leaned over Derek to pour him more wine, brushing his arm. He didn't move away. I excused myself and called Jasmine from the porch, the cold air biting at my bare arms. "She's doing it again," I whispered. "Doing what?" Jasmine asked, the sound of a microwave beeping in her background. "Pulling focus, undermining, making me feel ridiculous." "You're not imagining it," she said, no hesitation. "That's not teasing. That's control." Back inside, I found Melissa and Derek laughing over something on her phone. I sat down quietly. Dinner had ended, but the performance was still on. Later that night, as we were leaving, Derek handed me my coat while Melissa hugged him a beat too long. "You two are so cute," she cooed. "Really, I didn't think Claire had it in her." I bit my tongue and smiled. I'd learned that standing up for myself at family events only made me look dramatic. When we got home, I found it, folded neatly in the pocket of Derek's coat, a piece of notepad paper from our kitchen drawer, just 5 words in Melissa's handwriting: "You're better off without her." My chest tightened. My first instinct was to confront her. My second was to burn it. I did neither. Instead, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere downstairs, Dad was probably watching reruns. Melissa curled beside him on the couch like a cat who never left the house long enough to get blamed for anything. The next morning, she was gone. Back to campus. Back to wherever perfect girls go when they've finished twisting the knife. Dad made pancakes and didn't ask why I was quiet. As I washed the dishes, I looked at the spot on the fridge where Mom's recipe card used to hang. It had faded to a rectangle of clean paint. That was Melissa's magic. She could stir up a storm and leave without ever getting wet. And Dad? He didn't care if the house flooded, so long as it wasn't her fault. I wanted to believe I was imagining it. that I was just sensitive, that maybe she really did think my dress looked pilgrim chic as a compliment. But deep down, I knew Melissa didn't play fair, and Dad never cared if she did. By the time the pumpkin pie hit the table, I already regretted coming home. Thanksgiving 2022 was supposed to feel different. I told myself this year, maybe Dad would notice I wasn't 17 anymore. Maybe Melissa would act like a sister instead of a rival. Maybe Derek being there would make things easier, like bringing a steady hand to a shaky table. But walking into the house, with its half-lit Christmas lights hanging lopsided from the porch and the smell of overcooked stuffing clinging to the air, I felt something familiar tighten in my chest. Melissa had arrived first. Of course. She greeted Derek like an old friend, even though they'd only met once before. "You've gotten even cuter," she said with a wink, handing him a glass of Cabernet. "Claire always had good taste, I'll give her that." I rolled my eyes, but Derek just smiled politely and took the glass. He didn't know any better. Not yet. Dinner was stiff. We sat at the long table in the dining room, candles flickering beside dishes that hadn't changed in 20 years. Turkey, cranberry sauce from a can, overly salty green beans, and silence, broken only by Melissa's exaggerated laughter. She leaned toward Derek again and again, her wine glass a little fuller each time. "Do you work out?" she asked, brushing his arm. "You look like someone who lifts with intention." "Melissa," I said, trying to keep my voice even, "can you not?" She blinked at me, feigning innocence. "What? I'm just being friendly." "That's not friendly. That's embarrassing." She smirked and took a long sip. "Relax, Claire. You're so tense. It's probably why you always get headaches." Dad chuckled under his breath. "She's not wrong," he said, barely looking up from his plate. I wanted to scream. Instead, I stabbed a piece of dry turkey and forced a smile. After dessert, I stepped outside to call Jasmine. The wind was cooler than expected, rustling the last of the autumn leaves across the driveway. "She's doing it again," I said quietly. "Same as last time. Flirting, pushing." "Is Derek playing into it?" I hesitated. "He's not pushing back." There was a pause. "Claire," Jasmine said, soft but clear, "sometimes silence is just another kind of answer." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "I think I'm going to call it a night. I'll let them finish their little performance." Back inside, I told Derek I was heading to bed. He kissed my cheek and said he'd be up soon. I didn't ask how long soon would be. I just walked upstairs, changed into my old flannel pajamas, and tried to sleep under the hum of a too-loud ceiling fan. The clock on the nightstand blinked 2:13 a.m. His side of the bed was cold. I sat up slowly, my body heavy with something worse than exhaustion. I slipped on a hoodie and crept downstairs. The lights were off, the TV screen frozen mid-credits from a movie I hadn't watched. I moved past the kitchen, the dining room, the empty wine glasses on the coffee table. Then I stopped in front of Melissa's door. I should have walked away. Should have told myself I didn't need to know. But my hand moved before my head could stop it. The door creaked open, and there they were. On the futon she never offered to guests, half covered by a knit throw, limbs tangled, empty wine bottles on the floor, their clothes draped over the arm of the chair like afterthoughts. I couldn't breathe. My heart didn't race, it just stopped. "Derek," I said. My voice didn't even sound like mine. He jerked awake first, eyes wide, mouth fumbling. "Claire, we were just..." Melissa stirred and blinked at me, not the slightest bit surprised. "Do you mind?" she said flatly. "Some of us are trying to sleep." "Are you kidding me?" I whispered. My fingers trembled. You brought him into your room." "He came willingly," she replied, sitting up and brushing her hair back, like this was any other morning. "Maybe, if you paid more attention, he wouldn't be so easily bored." Derek wrapped a blanket around himself. "We were drunk. It didn't mean anything." I laughed, sharp and bitter. "You don't trip and fall into bed with someone's sister." You weren't exactly around much lately, he added, as if that was some kind of explanation. And Melissa was... there. My throat burned, but I didn't cry. Not yet. I turned and walked downstairs. Dad was in the kitchen, reheating apple pie in the microwave. The smell, usually warm and nostalgic, made me sick. "They're in bed," I said, "together." He didn't turn around. "They're adults, Claire." "That's all you have to say?" He shrugged, spooned whipped cream onto his plate. "Melissa makes her own choices. Maybe next time you should be more careful about who you bring around." I felt like the floor gave out under me. All these years I'd tried. I kept quiet, cleaned up, smiled through the jabs. I came home. I forgave. I hoped. And for what? George found me outside, sitting on the steps with my car keys in hand and my suitcase barely zipped. He didn't ask questions, just stood beside me holding a worn leather envelope. "It's the lake house," he said. "Margaret loved that place. She wanted peace. I think you do too." I stared at the envelope. "Why me?" He smiled gently. "Because you haven't been handed much in this family, and because you won't waste it." I drove through the night, the road quiet, my mind not. Every memory of Derek, every smirk from Melissa, every shrug from Dad, none of it could follow me anymore. The lake house waited still and silent like a blank page. I didn't look back. It was a Tuesday morning when the hospital called. I was sitting in Zach's kitchen, halfway through folding laundry, when my phone buzzed and the nurse on the other end asked, "Are you Claire Evans?" The name felt foreign on her lips. Claire Evans, like I was someone responsible. "Your father's had a mild stroke," she said. "He's stable but alone. No one else has responded." Melissa, I thought. I'll be there in 30. By the time I reached Charleston General, spring had crept into the trees outside. Spanish moss swayed from the live oaks lining the parking lot. It should have looked peaceful, but the sterile hum inside the hospital cut through any softness. Dad was in room 204, hooked to machines that beeped quietly. His face was pale, slack on one side, the stubborn line of his jaw slackened by something larger than pride. I stood in the doorway for a moment, unsure if I felt anything. Pity? Anger? Duty? "Claire?" he murmured, voice thick. "Hi," I replied, not stepping closer yet. "You came." I was the only one who picked up. He looked away. For the first few days, he barely spoke. I met with the nurses, arranged his medications, called the insurance company twice a day. Melissa never returned my texts. George stopped by once, but only stayed long enough to leave a thermos of tea and kiss Dad on the forehead. Zach drove in from Columbia the following weekend. He brought me coffee, kept a quiet hand on my lower back when I stood too long. At night, he'd read his paperback mystery novels in the hospital chair, never complaining, just present. I never asked him to come. He just knew. "You look like her," Dad said one night when I was helping him adjust his hospital gown. "Margaret?" He nodded, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Same eyes. I swallowed hard. It was the first time in my life he'd said my mother's name while looking at me. He didn't say anything else after that, but the silence felt less cold. There's something strange about taking care of someone who never took care of you. It requires a kind of strength that doesn't show up in big speeches or heroic acts. Just quiet resilience, waking up early to beat rush hour traffic, filling out pharmacy forms, sitting through physical therapy with a man who used to pretend you didn't exist. One morning, while helping him shuffle down the hallway with his walker, he paused, breathless. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "I know." His eyes searched mine for a long moment, then drifted toward the window where morning light pooled on the linoleum floor. Back in his room, I sat beside his bed and sipped hospital coffee. It tasted like cardboard and second chances. "You know," he said suddenly, "I never wanted a second child." The words landed with surprising gentleness, not because they didn't hurt, but because I'd already suspected them for years. Hearing them aloud was more confirmation than shock. I told Margaret it was too risky, that we were fine with one, But she wanted you. I stayed quiet, let the words settle like dust. When she died, He shook his head, struggling to find the sentence. I couldn't look at you. You were the reason. I mean, not really, but you were there. And she wasn't. So you hated me. I did, he whispered, because it was easier than hating myself. He turned toward me, tears just beginning to prick his eyes. I didn't know how to raise you, and when you started looking more and more like her, He stopped again. I told myself it wasn't my fault, that it was fate, that you ruined everything, and that became the story I lived in. I exhaled slowly. You punished me for living. He winced. Yes. For a moment, neither of us moved. The beeping of the monitor filled the space between us like a metronome for everything unspoken. I'm sorry, he added. I believe you, I said, but that doesn't mean I'm carrying it anymore. He looked confused. George told me once, I continued, forgiveness doesn't mean going back into the fire. It just means putting the ashes down. Dad nodded, tears now slipping past the corners of his eyes. I didn't reach for his hand. I just sat there, still and calm, like someone who'd made peace with their past, not by fixing it, but by refusing to live under it anymore. After everything, after the betrayal, the silence, the hospital, I still wanted him at my wedding. That was my mistake. It was early June when I called Dad. I stood on the screened porch of the lake house, barefoot, coffee cooling in my hand. The morning air was thick with jasmine and cicadas. Zach had gone into town for more stain samples. We were refinishing the dock before the big day. I want you to walk me down the aisle, I told Dad, my voice low but steady. There was a pause on the other end. Then, you do? I do. He exhaled. I didn't think you would ask. You're still my father, I said, and we've come a long way. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a gesture, a branch offered across the wreckage of years. We talked logistics, dates, guest list, rehearsal. I told him the ceremony would be at the lake house. He remembered it fondly, said Margaret used to love how the light hit the water in late afternoon. For a few days, things felt good, normal even. Then came the second call. I was thinking, he said, maybe it's time we bring the family together. I was arranging votive candles when he said it. The wicks trembled in my fingers. You mean, Melissa? He cleared his throat. It's been years, Claire. People change. She's still your sister. I didn't respond. She's willing to come, he continued, but only if she's welcome. I bit down hard on my cheek. Has she said that? Or are you just assuming? She's open, but she doesn't want drama. She wants to feel invited. I set the candle down too hard. Has she apologized? She doesn't think it would help at this point, he said gently. Why stir it all up again? I laughed, short and sharp, because she slept with my boyfriend, Dad, because she bragged about it, because she called me a mistake and never once said she was sorry. She was young. She was cruel. He went quiet. I heard the sound of his ice cubes clinking in a glass. Bourbon, probably. Middle of the day. I think you're being harsh, he finally said. Holding on to things like this, it's not healthy. Not for a marriage. Let it go. Make a fresh start. I hung up without saying goodbye. 2 days later, Jasmine came over with mock-up place cards and a bottle of white wine. We sat under the string lights in the backyard, names fluttering in our hands, a breeze rustling the edges. I need you to talk me down, I said. About? My dad wants me to invite Melissa. She let out a long breath. Of course he does. He says she's changed, that I'm the one holding things back. Has she called you? Texted? Anything? No? Then nothing's changed. I rubbed my eyes. He said I was punishing her. Jasmine tilted her head. An apology isn't punishment. It's a start. And if she won't even do that much, then what is she really asking for? To skip the consequences. Exactly. We sat in silence for a moment, cicadas humming around us. "She doesn't miss me," I said softly. "She misses winning." Jasmine nodded. "And your dad, he misses pretending nothing ever happened." The next morning, I called him. "I'm not inviting Melissa," I said before he could speak. His sigh was immediate. "Claire, number. Listen to me." My voice didn't shake this time. "This is my wedding. This is the family I'm choosing. And if you think being here means dragging in the one person who burned everything down, then maybe you shouldn't come either." He went quiet. I let the silence sit. "You'd really go through with it without me?" he asked finally. "You'd let someone else walk you down the aisle?" I took a deep breath. I already have. George showed up that evening in a flannel shirt and khakis, holding a small cedar box filled with cufflinks and an old watch. "I thought we could practice," he said with a soft smile. "Can't have your old man tripping over his own feet." We walked slowly along the edge of the dock, the boards freshly stained, the lake behind us golden in the early light. "Are you sure?" I asked. "About walking my granddaughter down the aisle?" He laughed. "Claire, I would have done it the day you were born if I'd known what was coming." He looped my arm through his, slow and steady. "Your dad's not a bad man," he said quietly, "just a lost one. And sometimes the worst thing about being lost is thinking you're still on the map." "I know." He stopped, turned to face me. "You've spent a long time cleaning up after other people's messes. Let this be yours, fully yours. No compromises." That night, I stood on the dock alone. The sky was streaked with pink and lavender, the water below catching every shade like a mirror trying its best. My bare feet pressed against warm wood. I watched a duck glide silently through the cove and thought of how peaceful it felt to not explain myself anymore. I could hear Zach's laughter inside, faint and warm. This time, I choose who walks beside me. My father didn't show up at my wedding, but my grandfather did, and that was more than enough. The sun dipped low over the lake as George and I stood at the edge of the backyard. Rows of white folding chairs lined the lawn. Lanterns swayed gently from tree branches, and a jazz trio played something smooth and low under the hush of early fall. The air smelled like hickory smoke, lemon cake, and a little bit of closure. George looked sharp in his old Navy suit, the one he wore to Margaret's memorial. He'd had it tailored, said he wanted to look alive in it for once. "Ready?" he asked, looping his arm through mine. I nodded. As we stepped onto the grass, every head turned. I caught glimpses of smiles, a few hands dabbing eyes. Jasmine stood near the arbor, holding a bouquet of sunflowers and eucalyptus, blinking fast. Zach stood beneath the archway, nerves giving way to something softer as soon as he saw me. We walked slowly, no rush. There was no reason to hurry a moment like this. I used to think walking down the aisle was about who gave you away. But George didn't give me away that day. He simply walked beside me, steady and proud, showing the world I didn't need fixing, just witnessing. The ceremony was short, honest. Zach and I wrote our vows on note cards and forgot to read half of them because we were crying and laughing at the same time. When the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," someone in the back whooped. We both smiled into the kiss. At the reception, string lights flickered to life as the sky turned dusky purple. Kids chased fireflies around the dock, and someone's uncle asked the jazz trio to play Blue Moon, which they did, slow and a little off-key, but charming. Then George tapped a fork against his glass. "If I could have your attention," he said, standing near the porch steps with a bourbon in hand. "There's something I'd like to say." The music lowered. Conversations paused. "Claire," he began, turning to me, "you've taught me something I should have learned decades ago, that love doesn't always mean staying silent." A ripple moved through the crowd. This lake house was meant to be passed down, and I always assumed it'd go to my son. But I've changed my mind. A pause. A beat. I'm giving it to Claire. Not because she asked, not because she earned it in some transaction, but because she brought peace back to this place. She brought family back into these walls. Gasps, then applause. I covered my mouth with my hands. "You've earned your peace," he added, eyes warm, "and it's yours now." Later that night, under the soft hum of fairy lights and the buzz of half-drunk family joy, my phone buzzed. Melissa. "Unbelievable. You stole it. You've always been a manipulative little leech. Enjoy the house. You'll lose it just like you lose everything." I stared at the screen, not angry, just tired. I didn't reply, just blocked the number. Around midnight, most guests had left. Jasmine and her fiancé were packing up dessert tins when Zach came over. "Your dad's here," he said quietly. I turned to see Richard standing at the edge of the lawn, just beyond the circle of light. He looked smaller than I remembered, his shoulders rounded, hands tucked in his coat pockets. "I'll talk to him," I said. Zach hesitated. "You sure?" I nodded. "Yeah, I want to end it the right way." We sat on the dock, the same one George and I had walked just weeks earlier, practicing for this day. Richard stared out at the water. The moon cast a long shimmer across the lake. "You look like her," he said. "You already told me that." He didn't smile. "I thought you'd call, after the gift. I figured you'd find your way here." He looked at me then. "You've taken everything." I took a breath. "No," I said quietly. "I finally kept something for myself." He looked away, jaw tight. "I gave you everything I had," he said. "You gave me silence, distance, blame. And when I finally built something of my own, you tried to take that too." He didn't argue. "I didn't ask for the lake house," I added. "George gave it to me because I stayed, because I showed up. Something you only do when there's something to claim." He looked older than ever, worn by the weight of choices he never took ownership of. "I'm not angry anymore," I said, "but I'm done carrying what was never mine to hold." He stood, hands still in his pockets, eyes on the ground. "Goodbye, Claire." I nodded. "Goodbye." He walked back through the yard, past the empty chairs and crumpled napkins, until the trees swallowed him whole. At sunrise, I sat on the porch with a notebook in my lap. The lake was still. Mist hovered over the water like breath that hadn't exhaled. I didn't write much, just one line. "I forgive you." But I'm done explaining why I had to leave. I didn't need a perfect family to feel whole. Just a quiet morning, a lake that held my reflection, and the freedom to choose peace. In the end, what saved me wasn't anger or revenge, but the decision to stop chasing love where it wasn't freely given. Sometimes, walking away is the most loving thing you can do, for yourself. Family isn't just who you're born to, it's who stays, who listens, who helps you grow when you forget how. If this story reminded you of something in your own life, I hope you'll share it. Some truths are easier to carry when we don't hold them alone.